The emergency session was called for 1400 on a Tuesday, which meant the GNSB regional office staff had 4 hours to rearrange the conference room, confirm the attendance of 2 external consultants, and grapple privately with the fact that in 12 years of operation the regional office had never convened an emergency session about anything, let alone a food stall on the transit level. Ossian Treth-Seven-Vey spent those 4 hours writing the final entry in a log that was now 12 pages long. Day 246, he wrote. Session today at 1400. All relevant documentation has been compiled and submitted. The matter will be formally addressed. This is the correct outcome of the correct procedure, and I stand by the decision to file. He looked at this. He added, Methforosk has been making the face for 3 days. I am choosing not to address this. He closed the pad. He looked at his desk. He looked at the transit level visible through his office window, specifically at Bay 14, where the breakfast crowd had thinned and Petra Voss was wiping down the counter with the unhurried efficiency of someone between services, her stall's canopy light casting warm amber onto the cold station tile. He looked away. He picked up the pad. He added, I am aware the log has not helped. Petra Voss arrived at 1358 in her work apron, carrying a covered container and looking around the conference room with the mild, orienting interest of someone who finds new rooms workable. She was 56, compact in the way of someone who had moved around a kitchen for most of her adult life, with the kind of face that had spent decades being the last face a lot of people saw before they felt better about something. She was not especially tall, which made no difference in a room with 6 people who were, and she did not appear to notice this. She set the container on the table near her seat. Jante Pell, who had been arranging the session materials with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this, looked at the container. What is that? She said, in the careful voice of a regulatory director who has a very precise sense of what the next 3 hours are supposed to look like. Soup, Petra said. I made too much. It travels well if you keep it covered. Is there somewhere I can plug in a warming element, or the session will proceed without a warming element, Jante said. She said it with complete professional neutrality. She made a note on her pad. The note said, container, soup. She looked at it and then added nothing, because there was nothing procedurally to add, and sat down. At 1401 she opened the session. The board's case was thorough. Ossian had, to be fair to himself, provided thorough documentation. Jante presented the dwell time data first. Transit level Bay 14. An unexplained 17% increase in corridor dwell time across the 8-month window corresponding to MAM's operating hours, previously attributed to the seating installation. Attribution now under review. She presented the biochemical screening results from Petra's vendor license certification, clean across 47 tested compounds, no allergen flags, no toxicity markers, no addiction profile compounds detected. She presented the summary of 14 informal anomaly reports submitted by Havan Station residents across 6 species, all describing variations of the same experience, which she characterized, in the careful language of a regulatory professional building a case, as an unexpected and undocumented neurological effect arising in proximity to the consumption of food prepared at the stall in question. Petra had been listening with her hands folded on the table, and the specific expression of someone who is receiving surprising information and trying to understand it before responding. At the dwell time figure, she said, 17% really? Yes, Jante said. I thought people just liked having somewhere to sit. A pause. The transit level seating before was. We can note that, Jante said. Sorry, go on. Petra folded her hands again. Jante went on. She presented Ossian's log, selected excerpts, the relevant analytical content, stripped of the more personal observations, though the entry from day 9 remained because it was the clearest articulation of the effect the board was investigating. When I am eating there, I feel, temporarily, as though everything is going to be acceptable. I do not know what this means biologically. I am aware it is not a standard nutritional effect. Ossian, across the table, had his hands flat on the surface. His bioluminescent jaw stripes were faintly lit. He did not look at Petra. Petra was looking at him. Board Member Treth-Seven-Vey, she said. You've been coming in every morning for 8 months. The log is a matter of formal record, Ossian said. My attendance at the vendor location was part of the observational methodology. I know, She was quiet for a moment. I thought you liked the bread. Ossian's hands remained flat on the table. The jaw stripes brightened, briefly, by a measurable degree. His hand moved 2 centimeters toward his pad, then stopped. The bread, he said, is relevant to the aromatic compound profile the consultant will be addressing. Right, Petra said. Sorry, go on. Yanta, who had watched this exchange and made a small note in the margin of her session file that said jaw stripes, went on. Peth Aaron presented his hypothesis at 1447. He was Darathi, long-limbed, precise-featured, with the particular earnest energy of a xenobiology consultant who had been handed a genuinely interesting problem and was aware that his solution was approximately 60% of the way to being adequate. He presented it cleanly, the thermal profile, the aromatic compound cascade from long-simmered collagen, the documented cross-species neurological responses to specific umami compound combinations, the statistical correlation between consumption temperature and reported effect intensity. It was good science. The room listened with the attention of people who understood good science. When he finished, he paused. I would note, he said, that the above represents a partial explanation of the mechanism of delivery. It does not, in my assessment, fully account for the effect as reported. Yanta said, can you clarify what you mean by does not fully account for? Peth said, the compounds explain approximately 60 to 70% of the reported effect variance. The remainder is not accounted for by the biochemical profile. And your hypothesis regarding the remainder? Peth looked at his notes. He looked at Petra. He said, I'd like to ask the vendor a question, if I may. The question was, what was the intended effect of the food? Petra thought about this in the honest way of someone who has never been asked to articulate something they have always done without articulation. That people feel better, she said. Better in what sense? Just, she considered, better, like someone looked after them for a minute. Peth wrote this down. He looked at it. He wrote, suspected mechanism, and left a blank. He looked at the blank. He looked at his partial explanation and the gap between it and the full effect, and he had a sense of the shape of the word that went in the blank. But he did not have it completely yet. Can you describe your process, he said, specifically the elements you consider non-negotiable? The stock has to be made from scratch, Petra said. I start it the night before, long cook time, 12 hours minimum. The pre-made base is fine for some things, but it tastes like it wasn't made for anyone, if that makes sense. She glanced at the board. Does that make sense? Several board members indicated with varying degrees of professional neutrality that they were following. The bread I make myself, because station bread is not right. I'm not sure how to explain not right. It's fine, it's nutritionally adequate, it just hasn't been. She stopped. It doesn't taste like someone made it for you. It tastes like a product. She looked at the table. I know that sounds like I'm being precious about it. I'm not. It just makes a difference. Peth wrote made for you and underlined it. I make sure everything is hot, Petra continued. Cold food is sad. I know that's not a scientific statement. But something that's meant to be warm and isn't is... There's something missing from it. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And what is it supposed to do, Peth said. Petra looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who is trying to explain water to a fish. Not because the fish is foolish, but because the fish has never had to think about water. Make sure they have enough, she said. That's all. I just try to make sure they have enough. The room was quiet for a moment. Ossian's hands had moved from the formal position, flat fingers curved, palms lifted slightly from the table. He noticed this about 5 seconds after it happened and returned them to flat. Mate 4 Osk, 3 seats down, was looking at a point somewhere above the window with the careful attention of someone who was absolutely not making a face. At 15:12, Yanta Pell called a brief recess. She did not explain the recess. She was a regulatory director of 12 years standing, and she did not need to explain a recess. She called it, and the room stood and redistributed, and Petra lifted the lid from the soup container and said, with the complete absence of strategic intent, "There's plenty, if anyone would like some while we're stopped." Yanta said, "Thank you, I'm fine." Petra said, "It's the root vegetable one today, the long-simmered kind. It travels better than the other sort." Yanta said, "I appreciate the offer." Petra replaced the lid. She looked at it. She looked at it, she looked at Yanta. She lifted the lid again. She said, "I have enough bowls." There was a beat. Yanta Pell accepted the soup with a small, precise inclination of her head, the formal Harashi receipt gesture, the one that maintained appropriate professional distance, and took it back to her seat and reviewed her session notes while she ate it, which was the behavior of a person who was not allowing the soup to be an event. The soup was hot. It had been made that morning from a stock started the previous night. It tasted in the specific and not quite classifiable way of things made by someone who has been making them for 30 years for specific people, like it had been made for someone. Yanta ate it while reviewing the session notes and was completely professional and did not react. She returned to the session. She opened with the 14 reports. She asked Peth to clarify the collagen hypothesis. She asked the biosystems analyst about the addiction profile screening methodology. She was, by any observable metric, running a clean procedure. 12 minutes after finishing the soup, she said, "Ossian, how long have you been having the late-night argument with your brother about the territorial claim?" The room went still. Yanta looked at what she had just said. She looked at her empty bowl on the edge of the table. She looked at Ossian, who was looking at her with all four eyes, an unusual configuration for a Treth in a formal setting, where the lower pair typically maintained a downward deferential angle. His jaw stripes lit at a level that Meth 4 Osk, who had known him for 11 years, had never seen in a professional context. Petra was looking between them with the expression of someone who has just understood that there is more in the room than she knew was there, and who is not surprised exactly but is careful. That entry was in the selected log excerpts," Yanta said. She said it precisely because it was true and because it was the only available footing. Day 9. "You mentioned it in the context of the effect duration." "Yes," Ossian said after a beat. "I was connecting the report documentation." Yanta looked at her session notes. She wrote something. She looked at it. She wrote something else. She said, in the level, decisive voice of someone who has identified a problem and is handling it correctly, "I'm recusing myself from the vote. Possible compromise of objectivity." She looked up. "Recess, 10 minutes." She said this last part from behind the complete ruins of her professional distance that had lasted approximately 12 minutes past the soup, and she said it with such precise composure that 3 board members agreed to the recess before registering that they had already been on a recess. The 10 minutes were mostly quiet and very full. 3 board members ate the soup. The biosystems analyst ate the soup. Peth Arin did not eat the soup on principle. He had a strict policy about consuming the subject of active investigation, which he took seriously and which he was currently violating in spirit if not in letter, by leaning over his notes at a 45-degree angle, cross-referencing Yanta's involuntary question against the Harashi neurological literature on memory and emotional suppression, building toward the word he'd been missing since like someone looked after them for a minute. The word arrived when he was reading the Day 9 entry for the 7th time, as though everything is going to be acceptable. Not resolving the thing, not fixing the thing, just the weight of it briefly lifted. The difference between having something and knowing you have it. The gap between what was there before and what was briefly not. He wrote, "Suspected mechanism, care." He stared at it for a moment with the expression of a scientist who has arrived at a correct answer that the scientific method is going to have a very uncomfortable time with. He underlined it. He underlined it again. He thought about writing further study required and decided to save it for the formal presentation. By the window, Ossian and Meth4Osk stood in the specific silence of people who have been colleagues for 11 years and do not need to perform the conversation. "You knew this would happen," Meth4Osk said. "I did not know this would happen. I filed a report because it was the correct procedure." "Yes," she said. "But you knew." Ossian looked at his pad. He looked at the soup container on the table, the one Petra had brought, plain and covered and warm for 2 hours on a cold transit morning because she had made too much, and it seemed wasteful not to. He said, "I thought it should be on the record." Meth4Osk said, "Yes." She looked out at the transit level. After a moment she said, "He's still being unreasonable about the eastern parcel?" Ossian's jaw stripes lit. He has been unreasonable about the eastern parcel since our father's second estate filing. He will be unreasonable about it until one of us is dead, at which point the surviving one will probably also be unreasonable about it out of habit. Meth Forosk said nothing. She looked at the transit level. Ossian said after a moment, "Thursday she's making the lamb." Said Meath Forosk, which was not a Treth formal register at all, but which meant, good. The vote was held at 1547. The arguments for controlled substance classification were presented with care and rigor. Real neurological effect documented across 6 species. Unknown mechanism, no existing regulatory category. Potential for uncontrolled expansion through the station network. The board member making the argument was a vet, thorough and precise, and he made it well. He believed it was the right call. He was not wrong about the effect being real. The arguments against were made by 2 board members, and then by Ossian, who spoke last. Ossian spoke in the formal Treth register, which required that the backward lean be at full extension, and the hands be flat and the words be chosen with the deliberate care of someone who is putting something important into the record and wants it to survive the reading. He said, the classification framework requires harm. He had reviewed the framework on 14 separate occasions across the preceding 8 months. He could not locate the harm. He said he was aware that an unclassified neurological effect produced by a multi-species food vendor was a legitimate regulatory concern. He had filed the report because it was the legitimate regulatory concern. He stood by the report. He said he had been eating at the stall every day for 8 months. He had been 20 minutes late to work on average once a week, because he had stayed longer than he intended. He was not impaired. His performance reviews in the preceding 8 months were the highest of his 22-year career, a fact he had verified before filing the report because he wanted to be accurate. He did not know how to account for this within the existing framework. The existing framework might not be the right tool for this particular problem. He paused. His hands were flat. His lean was at full extension. His jaw stripes were at the level Meth Forosk had never seen in a professional context. He said the only thing he had found across 8 months of documentation was the absence of something that had been present so long he had stopped registering it as weight. The soup did not resolve anything. The bread did not fix anything. Nothing at Mom's in Bay 14 fixed anything. But for the duration of being there, which was not long, which was 40 minutes at the outside on the days he stayed, he stopped carrying it just briefly and noticed for the first time that he had been carrying it. He said he did not know what classification that fell under. He was voting no. The vote failed, 4-3, with Yanta's recusal. Yanta noted it in the session record with the careful, specific neutrality of a person writing down something unprecedented without editorializing. She sat back, just slightly. The professional composure was completely intact. Pether, and watching her, filled in the blank. Suspected mechanism. Care. Peth's formal presentation ran 6 minutes. The collagen work was genuinely interesting. He covered the cross-species umami response literature, the thermal aromatic compound cascade, the preliminary data on consumption context neurological priming, and he presented it with the clean delivery of a scientist who knows his science and knows its limits simultaneously. When he reached the end of the formal section, he said, "I have an informal note I'd like to add to the record." Yanta said, "Proceed." Peth said, "The mechanism appears to be care." He said it the way he would have said the mechanism appears to be collagen-mediated umami response. Flat, matter of fact, the delivery of a result. He said care was not currently a classified substance or mechanism under the GNSB framework. He said this was worth addressing, and he would be submitting a separate proposal to the Xenobiology Network for a new investigative category. He said, the food was fine. He said further study required. He closed his pad. The room sat with this. Petra, who had been listening to Peth's presentation with the complete, quiet attention of someone who wanted to understand it and had been making progress, said, "I just try to make sure they have enough." Peth looked at her. He said, "Yes, that seems to be correct." He opened his pad again, wrote 1 line, and closed it for the last time. Petra looked around the room. She said, "There's still soup if anyone wants it before I pack up." 4 people reached for the container at the same time, and this time nobody pulled back. The session closed at 16:23. Petra packed her container. She said goodbye to Yanta. "Director Pell, thank you for being so thorough. I know it must have been a strange one." And Yanta, with the composed warmth of someone who has fully inhabited her professional role and is, behind it, genuinely grateful for something she does not yet have the right words for, said that she appreciated Petra's cooperation with the proceedings. She said it correctly and meant it entirely. Petra said goodbye to the board members in the order she had learned their names during the session, which was all of them, because she had been paying attention in the way she paid attention to everyone who sat at her counter. She said goodbye to Peth Aaron and told him that if he had more questions about the recipes, she was usually there by 0400 and the coffee was on by 4:15. Peth said he would take her up on that. He meant it. He would take her up on it approximately 63 times over the next 2 years. And the paper he eventually published would have an acknowledgments section that thanked Petra Voss in the breakfast service at Mams in Bay 14, Havan Station transit level, for sustained contribution to the investigative process. Petra kept a copy of the paper under the counter. She had not read it fully. She was pleased it existed. She told Ossian about Thursday on her way to the door. "I started the lamb on Monday," she said. 3-day braise. It'll be ready Thursday morning, and it's best eaten the day it comes off, so if you wanted," Ossian said formally, "that would be acceptable." Then he paused. The pause was shorter than it had been 8 months ago, on the day he had stood at her counter pointing at a picture. "I would like that," he said, which was not a formal register at all, and which he produced with the specific careful effort of someone choosing a register intentionally. "Thank you." Petra looked at him. She smiled, not at the formal effort, but at what was underneath it, which she had learned to recognize at counters over 20 years. "Good," she said. "I always make too much." She went. The door closed behind her. Ossian stood in the conference room with the session record on his pad and the empty soup container on the table and Meth Forosk watching him from across the room with the expression the Tref manual language read as, "Well, there it is." He picked up the soup container. It was clean, unremarkable. The kind of container that held things. He stood with it for a moment, then carried it to the corridor to return it to Petra and found she was already gone, the transit level visible through the corridor window showing her making her way back to Bay 14 with the easy, unhurried walk of someone going somewhere they know. He went back to his office. He set the container on his desk, to the right of his pad, in the space that was usually occupied by nothing, because Ossian's desk had no space for things with no category. The container was clean. It stayed on his desk for a year, and at some point it stopped being an anomaly and became simply there, the way that things you have decided to keep eventually are. He opened his log. He typed, "Day 246. Session concluded. Classification denied. Stall remains open. Peth Aaron has the word. He will build something with it eventually. I will help when he asks." Meth Forosk is no longer making the face. She is making a different face, which is worse. Thursday, lamb. He looked at this. Normally there was an assessment. In 11 years of logs, personal and professional, there had always been an assessment, the step where the entry pointed somewhere, reached a provisional conclusion, submitted the data to the framework for processing. He looked at the cursor in the blank space after Thursday, lamb. He looked at it for a long time. He closed the pad without writing anything. He sat back in his chair. He looked at the transit level through his window. Bay 14 was settling into the late afternoon lull. The post-lunch crowd gone, the pre-dinner crowd not yet arrived. Petra at the counter with the specific absorbed calm of someone doing necessary preparation. She was checking something, probably her stock levels. She would be starting the evening bread soon. She got up at 0400 to make the morning bread because it was best warm and the breakfast crowd came in cold. He thought about his brother. He thought about the Eastern parcel. He thought about 9 years and the specific weight of an argument that had no resolution because neither party had decided to prioritize resolution over being right, which was a decision he had been making continuously for 9 years without being entirely aware he was making it. He thought about the lamb on Thursday. He thought he might mention it, not to resolve it, just to say it out loud to someone who would hear it, in the way that Petra heard things, the underneath of things, the thing below the thing that was said, and who would not file it or assess it or tell him what to do. But who would probably give him more bread while he was saying it and ask if he wanted anything else? He had not said it out loud in 9 years. He thought he might be nearly ready. Bay 14, 0632 the following morning. The transit level was doing what it did, moving, multi-species, the ordinary productive noise of 40,000 people on their way to wherever they were going. Mams was open. The canopy light was on. The smell reached the corridor from approximately 40 meters out, which Peth Aaron had by now measured to 3 decimal places and which Ossian had stopped trying to be objective about because the data was not helping. He came to the counter. He did not point at the picture. "The braised one," he said, "and the bread." "Coming up," Petra said. She was already moving. "How are you this morning?" "Well," Ossian said. And then, because she was asking and she wanted to know, "My brother sent a message last night." Petra put the bread in front of him. She looked at him with the steady, unhurried attention she gave to things worth attending to. "Was it the usual kind?" she said. "The usual kind." He looked at the bread. He picked it up. "I have not yet replied." She turned to check the braised pot. "Are you going to?" "I don't know." He ate the bread. It was warm. I think I've been deciding something about it. I'm not sure I've decided yet." Petra put the braised dish in front of him. She leaned on the counter with the posture of someone who is not in a hurry and is not performing not being in a hurry. "Take your time," she said. "Thursday you can tell me where you've gotten to with it." "Yes," Ossian said. The pause before it was barely a beat. He ate. The transit level moved around him. Petra was telling him about a Solveth dock supervisor who had come in yesterday afternoon and stayed 2 hours eating soup and talking about his family. She told it with the warm, slightly fond amusement of someone who was continuously interested in people and found them, on balance, excellent, and Ossian listened while eating, which was not a thing he had done anywhere except this counter in 22 years, and which he had, after 8 months, stopped cataloging as anomalous. "There's also this," Petra said, and reached under the counter and produced a folded stack of papers, slightly creased from being in a small space. "That Hareshi nutrition student who's been coming in every morning. She left this last week. 14 pages. I've been meaning to read it." She set it on the counter. "I think it's about the soup." Ossian looked at it. Something in his expression moved. "I would like to read that," he said, without quite meaning to. Petra looked at him. The smile was the one that knew the underneath of things. She slid the papers across the counter. "I'll get it for you Thursday," she said, "when the lamb's on." Ossian looked at her. He looked at the papers in his hands. He looked at the counter where the bread had been, the dish, the ordinary evidence of someone making sure there was enough. "Thank you," he said. It was the 3rd time he had said it outside the formal register. He noticed this and did not write it down. Some things did not require further documentation. He finished his breakfast. He went to work. The soup container was on his desk where he had left it, clean and without category. And he hung his jacket on the back of his chair and sat down and opened the nutrition student's paper to the first page and read, "Preliminary biochemical analysis of long-simmered collagen-rich stock and its cross-species neurological effects, with particular attention to the anomalous residual effect not accounted for by standard compound profiling." And then, at the bottom of the first page, in the slightly smaller type of a footnote, "Note, I ate it again the next day." Ossian sat with this for a long moment. He opened his log. He typed, "Day 247. The student noticed the gap. Peth will want to see this." Thursday. He closed the pad. He turned to the second page. Outside his window, the transit level moved through its morning, and Bay 14 was warm and the bread was best warm and there was always enough.